I'm going to take you through the steps for doing machine applique. This is fusible web holding it down, and we're going to start by looking at this. The leaf is underneath of this apple, so we'll be stitching the leaf before the apple. Whatever's on top, you want to have a nice smooth stitch around, so you want to, whoever's on top is done last. If we look here at the stem of the apple, it's under the apple, it's under the leaf. So I would do the stem, the leaf, and then you notice this leaf for the apple is on top of the apple. So I would do the stem and the leaf, doesn't matter which order you do those two in. Then I'm going to stitch around for the apple, and then the last stitching I will do is on the leaf. We're looking at the screen of my sewing machine. I have a Baby Lock Destiny, and we have a quilting section tab here, and I'm using this applique stitch. Let me see if I can come in a little closer, because sometimes with the screens, there we go. So I'm using this stitch. Some people will use this one is the blanket stitch, so it's going to stitch down, over, and back, down, over, and back. Some of these blanket stitches may stitch back and forth and do a double, so you just have to test them on your fabric, scrap of fabric, to see what you want to get. This one I find works perfect for me. I don't have to adjust the length of the width, though I could if I wanted it a little wider. I could come down to my width and make it a little wider, and you see how my stitches are going out further. So it's a matter of personal preference for that. I don't use the same all the time. It really depends on what I'm doing, whether I want the stitches to show more, show less. If I'm doing something smaller, I want to make sure that I use a smaller stitch, and the stitch that's coming this way is called the bite. So this is going to stitch along the edge of your applique, and then this will bite into the applique or stitch into the applique fabric. So it's going to stitch, stitch, bite, stitch, stitch, bite. And I'm going to just put this back to reset, so I'm at my actual settings. I have my pivot on, so when I stop sewing, my needle goes down, my foot comes up, so I can turn my fabric if I need to, and I'm also locking my stitches at the beginning and the end. I've started a little bit of the leaf, and I'm going to stitch and show you how I go along that edge of the fabric. I'm going to bite into the fabric there, and then I'm going to turn. I'm only going to move my fabric around when my stitch is out along the edge. I'm trying to go slow here so you can see exactly how it works. The leaf is probably one of the more difficult areas to do, so I thought you might want to see that. I've got 60-inch row here, so just bear with me while I move it around. I want to make sure I keep my fabric flat. When I get to my end, so that the edge of a piece that, say, is pointed like that is, I'm working, my stitch is working on what would be the edge. If I stitch across that point, that's no problem for me. I kind of feel better because, like, for example, I'm coming across here. It would be more of a point. But if I'm coming around here and I stitch across that, I find that's okay because that helps hold that end down. Even though this is a permanent fusible web, sometimes we don't fuse it on quite as permanently as we should. So I would just come around here and then just go around, and that's what I'm doing here. Is I've come up here. I'm now coming around that edge, and you notice that when I move my fabric, my needle's always on the outside edge of that applique fabric. So what I did there is, I knew I was getting to this edge. Let me get my pointer again. I knew I was coming to this little, it was like a little area like right here, that I am right there. And I didn't want to stitch into this before I took my bite. So I kind of held my fabric so that it didn't feed, and that gave her the opportunity to have that bite right in the corner. So don't be afraid to do that. Let me see if I can get in just a little closer for you. No. Without getting blurry. And again, here's one of those ends that I'm going to be, because it stitches twice before it does the bite, I'm just going to come right across here. And then see how I'm perfectly lined up to go down the other side. And you can see my stitches. I tried to use a color that you could see. It's a blendable, which means it's multicolored, but it's kind of fall colors. You can see if you're watching where the thread's going up and down by the needle, you can see how different colors keep coming up. I'm going to continue along that way and get that done. Then I'm going to get the stem done, and I'll come back and show you about going around the apple. Before we move on to the apple, I thought I would take a leaf that you could see the coloring difference more between the thread and the actual fabric. And this is another leaf, so it's on the same idea as the one we just did. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my needle comes down right at this edge of this fabric, and it's going to stitch along this edge, and it's going to take that bite into the fabric as we go around. So I make sure I use my hand wheel, always turning my hand wheel toward me, so that I'm coming down right where the fabric starts. So I know for sure I'm all set to go. It's going to lock the stitch. See how I'm stitching right along the edge, the bite's going into the fabric. And remember I told you I have my pivot feature on my machine, so when I stop sewing, I can move my fabric because my needle went down and my foot comes up. You have to bear with me a little bit. I'm actually sewing through the lens of the camera, looking through the lens of the camera, so that I know that I'm trying to get as close up picture as I can get. Now remember how I told you I'll hold my fabric because it's going to want to, hopefully if I was paying attention, it's going to bite, do the bite now. So see how I was able to get that stitch holding that corner. I went into the fabric a little bit, but that's okay. I'm just going to come back out again. Oh, in the fabric again. I don't normally do that, but I'm not going to worry about it. So if you count your stitches from the bite is 1, 2, then it's going to bite. one, I'm going to hold this because I want a bite in the corner. So I'm going to hold my fabric so I get my second stitch, and there's my bite in my corner. And then I'm just going to come across that little edge because I probably held that a little bit too much showing you. Oh, now I went too far. You can see all the mistakes that you can make, the learning process, and it'll be fine. You'll be fine. I'm going backwards here. Let me get where I'm supposed to be. There we go. I've got my fabric rolled up here, and I've got a clip on the other end so I can work around because I'm at the very edge of my row, which is 60 inches long. So we're coming back around to the beginning. The beginning's right here. You can see I went over that stitching a little bit. I'm going to do another, let it take another bite in here. And then I'll do my locking stitch. And let me just back this up a little bit here. Oop. So you can see it's all done. That was a little spot that when I was first showing you about trying to make a corner, remember I said I held it a little too much. So you can see I got that little extra bite there. You know, you can take that out if you want to. I wouldn't. See how I like to get in the corner there. In this one, I couldn't get in the corner. I had to hold 2 stitches there, so I'm not going to worry about things like that. So that kind of gives you an idea of how to do your stitching. You can see how that line of straight stitching runs along there, and the bite into the applique fabric. So just have fun with it and don't try to be perfect doing it. Now we're back to our apple and leaf. I stitched the leaf already. I did the stem, so you can see. Now when I did the stem, let me get it up here a little bit here for you. When I did the stem, I did a shorter stitch length and a smaller stitch width, 1.5 on each of those. Just remember to put it back when you're done. I may do that same thing on the leaf because it's small, but we'll see when we get to it. So I've put my settings back to the default settings for this stitch, same stitch that I showed you on the leaf. Hope I rolled it up. I think I might have rolled it too close to myself. I'm going to bring the needle down so that I am positioned. Let's see if I can get you in a little closer. So that I am positioned right here where the fabric, the applique fabric edge is. So I'm going to be starting here, locking my stitch. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring my needle down so I know that I'm starting right where I should be. Bring my foot down. And it'll do a locking stitch automatically. And, I don't want to, oh, I got my little thread tail in there. Come out of the way. I don't want to turn because I'm on the bite of the fabric. See how I'm in the fabric? So I want to go back out and then turn my fabric. And you see how I'm following along the edge. And you see here, I'm going to be going right over where the applique stitching I did for the leaf. So if you, especially if you wanted to do some kind of a satin stitch or thicker stitch, that would just cover over that little beginning right there. Again, I'm going to cross right over where I started my stitching on my leaf. Now I'm going to be stopping more often here because I am in an area where there's a few turns. Holding my fabric a little too close. Let me just move that out of the way. There we go. I'm trying to keep my fold of fabric out of your way. Now when I get here, let me see if I can come in a little closer for you without it getting too blurry. Oop. I can decide that I might not want to have stitching here because it might be too close to this piece. So I think what I'll do is my default stitch length and width is 2.0, so I'm going to take them both down to 1.5. Well, I guess it's either 1.4 or 1.6. That one doesn't have a choice, so I went to the 1.4. And I'm going to come down more on my width to 1 because you could see the needle was going over quite a ways. But you see how close it got. Now I can get here, and if I don't want to have that stitching run into the into the leaf itself, I can just switch to just a straight stitch and just give a couple of straight stitches. Oh, gotta get back onto the fabric. On that fabric. And then just do a locking stitch if I'm concerned with that fabric coming undone. Oh, I picked the wrong locking stitch. I picked the 3 forward, 3 back, and I should have picked the stitch in place. Oop. So let me zoom back again. So you can see now we have our leaf stitch, the apple stitch, the stem, and the last thing I'm going to do is the leaf, and I think that I will go back to my regular applique stitch, and I'm going to take my width down to 1, I think. And the width is the bite coming in, and my length of stitch I'll do 1.4. And let's see how that turns out. I got to change my thread. Okay, now we're ready to do our leaf. I've changed my thread to green. I made my applique stitch width 1.0 millimeters and the length 1.4 millimeters. In thread length and width, you can't convert that to inches because it's just it would just be too small of a fraction. So since you don't have to know what the inches are, don't concern yourself with the millimeters. Is just learn that it the number is whatever size you want it to be. So I put my needle down So it's in my fabric where I want the stitches to start. It's going to do a locking stitch. And then start on its way. And you see how it's a much tinier bite that's going in. So it gives me a little more maneuverability, but it also looks more appropriate for the small piece. Again, that's my personal preference. Excuse me. It's all up to you what you want to do. Also, if you don't have an applique stitch, you can use a simple zigzag, again making it the width and length that appeals to you. Excuse me. Now at this point, let's see how I can do. I really want to see if I can get a stitch right in that point. So I know there's going to be a bite now, and then there's going to be one stitch, and then I'm going to turn it because there's one more stitch to go. I'm going to kind of hold it and see I got that bite in that edge. And then I kind of just come over the edge with that next stitch. So I know that my end is held down well. Bear with me, I'm trying to sew through the camera lens. Notice again that I'm always turning my fabric when my needle is out at the edge, not when I'm in the bite. If I moved it while the needle was into the fabric, I'd end up with like a little V, because when the stitch comes back out, it won't line up with the stitch that came in because I moved the fabric. Again, I'm gonna, and see how I'm coming by those other stitches. So if it bothers you to have them that close, that's when you can do either a straight stitch or a shorter stitch. I'm coming to the edge. I got a bite there automatically, so that was kind of nice. And then I actually let my needle, if you can see, right here, I let my needle sink into a little bit of that fabric right on that edge, just so I don't have a little upturn on my little point there. So I'm coming back to the beginning of where I started, and I'm going to go over just a little bit, and then I'm just going to lock my stitch. And there you have, let me back up here a little bit. Oop. And there's your leaf, your apple, your stem, and the little apple leaf all finished.